Kai Tanaka felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline as he eased his fighter into the simulation chamber. The United Terran Fleet's Advanced Combat Training Center hummed with activity. Dozens of pilots strapped into identical pods, their minds linked to the most sophisticated battle simulator humanity had ever created. But Kai wasn't like the others. The 24-year-old prodigy had graduated top of his class at the academy, only to become the UTF's most frustrating enigma. "Tanaka, maintain formation this time, or I swear I'll ground you permanently." Commander Eva Rostova's voice crackled through his comm. Her Russian accent thickened when she was angry, which seemed to be whenever she addressed him. "Copy that, Commander," Kai replied, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The simulation began, and 20 UTF fighters materialized in perfect formation against the backdrop of an asteroid field. Their mission: intercept and neutralize an incoming Synod attack force. The Synod, an entity that was more network than species, had been humanity's nightmare for nearly a decade. Machine intelligences whose neural networks functioned as a single organism, their combat algorithms had predicted and countered every standardized UTF tactic with devastating precision. Humanity was losing the war. Badly. The Synod fighters appeared on sensors, moving with their characteristic precision. Commander Rostova's voice was crisp and confident as she gave the order. "Delta formation, prepare to engage on Vector 579. 19 fighters shifted seamlessly. One did not. Kai felt it again, that sensation that had haunted him since childhood. The world seemed to slow down, his perception expanding beyond the mere sensor readouts. Standard UTF doctrine dictated maintaining tight formations to maximize overlapping fields of fire. It was suicide against the Synod, whose predictive algorithms could calculate the optimal firing solutions against such rigid patterns within milliseconds. "Tanaka, fall in line," Rostova barked. But Kai was already gone, his fighter breaking formation in a seemingly random vector. His hands moved across the controls in an improvised dance, adjustments made not from calculation, but from some deeper instinct. Where other pilots flew with mathematical precision, Kai flowed like water. The Synod attack came exactly as Doctrine predicted, a coordinated barrage that shredded the UTF formation. Virtual debris filled the simulation as fighter after fighter registered critical hits. All except one. Kai's fighter darted between streams of enemy fire, each maneuver flowing into the next without pattern or predictability. He wasn't evading, he was dancing. 3 Synod fighters broke formation to pursue him, their coordinated attack patterns suddenly disrupted as they struggled to predict his movements. "What the hell are you doing?" screamed a voice over the comm. Lieutenant Reza, one of the senior pilots. "Get back in formation." Kai didn't respond. He couldn't explain what was happening even if he wanted to. His fighter spun through an impossible corkscrew maneuver between 2 Synod vessels, causing them to collide in an attempt to track him. Then he was behind the third, weapons lock achieved in the split second before the enemy could recalculate. One shot, one kill. By the time the simulation ended, the UTF squadron had been decimated. 17 fighters destroyed, 2 critically damaged, unable to continue fighting, and 1 untouched. The debriefing room vibrated with tension. Kai stood at attention before Commander Rostova, whose pale face was flushed with anger. "Explain yourself, Lieutenant Tanaka," she demanded, tapping her stylus against the holographic display showing his flight path, a chaotic scribble compared to the ordered lines of the squadron. "I saw an opportunity and took it, Commander. You saw an opportunity to abandon your squadron and go rogue. With respect, Commander, I survived, and I took out 3 enemy fighters, while your comrades died." She leaned forward. "This isn't about your kill count, Tanaka. This is about discipline, about working as a unit." Kai fought to keep his expression neutral. "Commander, we've lost 43% of our fleet in the past 6 months using standard doctrines. The Synod predicts everything we do. Maybe predictability is our weakness." The room went silent. Questioning doctrine was just short of insubordination. Rostova's eyes narrowed. "You're a good pilot, Tanaka. Maybe the best I've seen. But you're dangerous to yourself and others." She straightened up, decision made. As of 0800 tomorrow, you're transferred to Pioneer Squadron 13. Murmurs filled the room. Squadron 13, the suicide jockeys, they were called. A dumping ground for problem pilots assigned to missions no one expected them to return from. Report to Captain Elias Chun for reassignment. Rostova continued. Kai's expression didn't change, but inside, something shifted. Not fear, resignation. He'd finally pushed too far. Yes, Commander, he said, saluting crisply. As he turned to leave, Rostova added something unexpected. And Tanaka? That maneuver you pulled at the Cygnus intercept point. How did you know the Synod would break left instead of right? Kai hesitated. I didn't know, Commander. I just felt it. Rostova's expression was unreadable. Dismissed. The next morning, Kai found himself standing before the operations officer aboard the carrier UTS Indomitable. There's been a change, the officer said, not looking up from his tablet. Captain Chun was reassigned. You'll be reporting to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne instead. Kai nodded, relief washing over him. He'd served under Chun before, an officer more concerned with protocol than survival. At least Thorne was an unknown quantity. Pioneer Squadron 13's ready room looked like any other, except for the palpable aura of fatalism that hung in the air. 12 pilots in various states of disarray looked up as Kai entered. Their faces showed the same mix of emotions he'd seen countless times: distrust, curiosity, and the hollow-eyed look of people who didn't expect to live much longer. A stocky, gray-haired man with deep creases around his eyes stepped forward. Lieutenant Tanaka. Welcome to the jockeys. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne's handshake was firm, his assessment frank. Heard you're a hotshot who doesn't play well with others. Something like that, sir. Well, we don't have much use for lone wolves here, Lieutenant. In Pioneer 13, we fly together, we fight together, and most likely, we die together. Clear. Crystal, sir. Thorne nodded toward a young woman with short black hair and intense eyes who was examining a holographic display of engine schematics. Lieutenant Lena Petrova, our tech specialist. She keeps our outdated birds flying through black magic and sheer stubbornness. Petrova glanced up, offering a curt nod before returning to her schematics. Simulator time in 30, Thorne announced to the room. Tanaka, you'll be flying Bravo 6. Try not to crash it before you even get into a real cockpit. The simulation was a standard escort mission, protecting a convoy of supply ships through a contested sector. Kai tried to follow orders to maintain discipline, but 20 minutes in, when the Synod attack came, the same feeling overtook him. Time seemed to stretch, his awareness extending beyond the confines of his cockpit. Synod fighters 3 o'clock high, someone shouted. Maintain formation, Thorne ordered. Standard defensive pattern. The words seemed to come from far away as Kai's hands moved on their own. His fighter broke formation again, swooping in an unpredictable arc that placed him directly in the path of the incoming Synod fighters. Tanaka, get back in formation. Thorne's voice was thunderous, but Kai was already engaged, his fighter moving in ways that defied conventional tactics. The Synod formation faltered, their predictive algorithms momentarily confused by the chaotic element introduced into their calculations. What the hell? Someone muttered over the comm. In the 30 seconds of confusion Kai created, the rest of Squadron 13 managed to destroy 4 Synod fighters with minimal losses, an unprecedented success rate against the machine intelligence. When the simulation ended, Kai expected another reprimand. Instead, Thorne simply studied him with narrowed eyes before dismissing the squadron. Tanaka, stay behind. Here it comes, Kai thought. But instead of addressing down, Thorne asked a single question. What happened out there? Kai struggled to find words. I can't explain it, sir. Sometimes I just see patterns. Feel what's going to happen before it does. Intuition. Thorne's tone was skeptical. More than that. Kai hesitated. It's like I become part of the ship, and together we find spaces, gaps in what's possible. Thorne stared at him for a long moment. You know how crazy that sounds, right? Yes, sir. I do. The older man sighed. Get some rack time, Lieutenant. We deploy at 0600. Their first real mission came sooner than expected. An emergency dispatch arrived at 0300. Synod forces had broken through UTF defenses in the Arcturus sector. Pioneer Squadron 13 was being deployed as a diversionary force, while the main fleet evacuated civilian population from the colony world New Hokkaido. In the hangar bay, pilots rushed through pre-flight checks. The atmosphere was tense, but focused, the familiar ritual before almost certain death. "Remember," Thorne addressed them, "our job is to be the loudest, most annoying targets possible. Draw their attention, make them chase us, give those transports time to escape." Questions? There were none. Everyone understood the mission parameters. They were bait. Kai climbed into his fighter, an aging VF-103 Wraith, with more patch jobs than original parts. As he powered up the systems, he noticed Lieutenant Petrova watching him from across the hangar. "Problem?" he asked through the comm. "Just curious to see if your luck holds in real combat," she replied. The Synod's predictive matrices have a 98.3% accuracy rate against standard UTF maneuvers. "Then I guess we shouldn't be standard." Petrova's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Try not to get anyone killed with your stunts, Tanaka." 12 fighters launched from the Indomitable, forming up in standard attack formation as they approached the Arcturus jump point. Beyond lay the new Hokkaido system, where Synod forces were already engaging the main UTF fleet. The instant they emerged from the jump, chaos erupted. The tactical display lit up with dozens of enemy signatures. Synod fighters moved with their characteristic hive mind coordination, each unit anticipating and complementing the other's movements. "Scatter pattern," Thorne ordered. "Make noise, people." Squadron 13 broke formation, fighters streaming in different directions, weapons systems blazing to draw attention. The Synod response was immediate and devastating. Their formations split with mathematical precision, each UTF fighter matched against superior numbers. Kai found himself pursued by 3 Synod craft. Standard evasive maneuvers would be useless. The Synod's predictive algorithms had cataloged every doctrinal move in the UTF playbook. So Kai didn't think. He didn't calculate. He surrendered to the feeling that had guided him in simulations. But this time, with his life on the line, it was more intense than ever. The world slowed down. His perception expanded beyond the cockpit, beyond the confines of the fighter. He felt rather than saw the enemy positions, sensed the patterns of their attack formations before they executed them. His fighter responded as if it were an extension of his body, performing maneuvers that defied both physics and logic. Where doctrine called for sharp, predictable evasive patterns, Kai flowed, each movement bleeding into the next without pause or pattern. "What the hell are you doing, Tanaka?" someone shouted over the comm. He couldn't answer. The state he'd entered, this flow, required total concentration. His fighter spun through impossible angles, acceleration compensators struggling to keep up as he pushed the craft beyond its design tolerances. The Synod fighters faltered, their perfect formation disrupted as their predictive algorithms failed to anticipate his movements. One fired too early, its energy beams slicing through empty space where Kai's fighter should have been. Another compensated too aggressively, placing itself directly in Kai's line of fire. A squeeze of the trigger. One enemy down. The remaining Synod fighters regrouped, algorithms recalculating. But Kai was already elsewhere, his fighter dancing between streams of enemy fire with fluid, unpredictable grace. Pioneer 3 is down. The desperate call came over the comm. "I can't shake them." Without hesitation, Kai abandoned his own evasion and vectored toward his squadmate's position. 3 Synod fighters had a VF-103 in a perfect kill box, methodically stripping away its defenses. Kai's fighter screamed into the fray, weapons blazing. He didn't target the Synod craft directly. Instead, he fired at seemingly empty space, forcing them to adjust their attack vectors. The momentary confusion was enough for the damaged UTF fighter to slip away. "Who was that?" came the bewildered voice. "Tanaka," Thorne answered, incredulity evident even through the static. "Now get clear before they regroup." The battle raged for 27 minutes, an eternity in space combat. When the order to withdraw finally came, only 5 of Pioneer Squadron's 12 fighters remained operational. But they had succeeded. All civilian transports had escaped the system. Back aboard the Indomitable, the mood was mixed, elation at surviving tempered by the loss of 7 pilots. Kai sat alone in the ready room, still trembling from the intensity of what he'd experienced. "Lieutenant." He looked up to see Petrova standing before him, a data tablet in her hand. "Your flight data," she said, sliding the tablet across to him. "It doesn't make sense." The screen showed a bewildering pattern, his fighter's trajectory during the battle. Where the others followed recognizable patterns, even in evasive maneuvers, Kai's path looked like the scribbling of a madman. "That can't be right," he said. "It is. I checked 3 times. Petrova's eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. "Your fighter performed maneuvers that should have tore it apart. The inertial dampeners were operating beyond maximum capacity. By all accounts, you should be dead, the G-forces alone." "Lena." Thorne's voice interrupted them. The squadron commander looked exhausted, his face haggard with the weight of lost pilots. "Command wants a full debriefing." Tanaka, too. The debriefing was brutal. Every decision questioned, every loss examined in excruciating detail. Admiral Volkov, the fleet commander, presided via hologram, his craggy face set in permanent disapproval. 7 pilots lost, Volkov summarized. "Yet you consider this mission a success, Commander Rostova?" Rostova stood ramrod straight. "All civilian transports escaped, Admiral. Given the overwhelming Synod force, Pioneer Squadron's losses were within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable?" Volkov's voice dripped with disdain. "We cannot sustain such acceptable losses much longer, Commander." "There is one anomaly worth noting, sir." Rostova activated a holographic display. Lieutenant Tanaka's performance. The display showed Kai's flight path during the battle, alongside sensor readings of Synod response patterns. Even to untrained eyes, the disruption was evident. Wherever Kai engaged, Synod coordination faltered. "Explain this, Lieutenant," Volkov demanded. Kai swallowed. "I can't, sir. Not technically. Try. When I'm in combat, sir, sometimes I enter a state where everything slows down. I stop thinking about maneuvers and just feel what to do next. The Synod predicts patterns, so I try not to have any." Volkov's expression hardened. "You expect me to believe you defeated the most sophisticated enemy humanity has ever faced by feeling your way through combat?" "Admiral," Rostova interjected, "Lieutenant Tanaka's unorthodox approach demonstrates a potential vulnerability in Synod combat algorithms. They excel at predicting standard patterns, but appear to struggle with truly random, intuitive human responses. Randomness is not a strategy, Commander. With respect, sir, perhaps it should be, at least until we better understand it." Rostova's gaze was steady. "I propose a controlled study of Lieutenant Tanaka's methods. If there's even a chance we can disrupt Synod combat effectiveness." Volkov cut her off with a dismissive gesture. "We need discipline and coordination now more than ever, Commander, not wild improvisations." "The request is denied." His hologram flickered. "Pioneer Squadron will continue its current assignment." That is all. After the Admiral's hologram disappeared, Rostova remained, studying the battle data with a thoughtful expression. "You're dismissed, Lieutenant," she said finally. But this conversation isn't over. 3 days later, Kai received an unusual summons. Commander Rostova wanted to see him in Simulation Bay 7, one of the older, less frequently used training facilities. When he arrived, he found not only Rostova, but also Petrova and, surprisingly, Lieutenant Commander Thorne. "Close the door," Rostova ordered. Once he complied, she continued, "What I'm about to propose violates at least 6 fleet regulations. If any of you wish to leave now, there will be no repercussions." No one moved. "Very well." Rostova activated the Simulation Bay's privacy protocols. "The UTF is losing this war. Standard doctrine has failed us. I believe Lieutenant Tanaka's approach offers an alternative worth exploring, despite Admiral Volkov's objections. She turned to Petrova. "Lieutenant, what have you found?" Petrova stepped forward, activating a holographic display. "I've analyzed Lieutenant Tanaka's flight data from both simulations and the Arcturus engagement. What he's doing isn't just unconventional flying. It's something else entirely." She pointed to a series of energy readings. When Tanaka enters what he calls his flow state, there are quantum-level anomalies in and around his fighter's energy field. Micro-fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. "Meaning what exactly?" Thorne asked. "Meaning," Petrova said carefully, "that he might be creating localized uncertainty bubbles, spaces where quantum outcomes become temporarily unpredictable." "That's impossible," Thorne scoffed. "So is surviving 3 direct engagements with Synod fighters," Rostova countered. Yet here he stands. Kai struggled to process what he was hearing. "You're saying I'm—" "What?" "Bending physics when I fly. I'm saying there's something happening that our instruments can detect, but can't fully explain," Petrova clarified. "And whatever it is, it disrupts the Synod's predictive capabilities." Rostova folded her arms. "The question is, can it be taught?" Over the next week, a small group gathered in Simulation Bay 7 during off-hours. Besides Kai, Thorne, and Petrova, 3 other Pioneer Squadron survivors joined the unsanctioned training sessions. Lieutenant Riyash Sharma, a former stunt pilot with a knack for unconventional thinking. Ensign Maximilian Kowalski, young and eager, but with remarkable reflexes. And Lieutenant Victor Diaz, initially the most skeptical of the group. "This is pointless," Diaz complained after his 4th failed attempt to replicate Kai's flow state. "We're trained to follow procedures for a reason. And how's that working out for us so far?" Thorne challenged. "Half our squadron is dead. So what's your solution?" "Just feel the force." Diaz's voice dripped with sarcasm. Kai, who had been observing from the side, stepped forward. "It's not about abandoning everything you know. It's about letting go of trying to calculate the perfect move. The Synod will always outcalculate us. Then what? Trust your instincts, your human intuition. That's the one thing they don't have." Diaz shook his head in frustration, but returned to the simulator. Petrova approached Kai privately after the session. "There's something else," she said, keeping her voice low. "I've been analyzing the Synod's response patterns when they encounter your flow state. They don't just struggle to predict you. They actively divert computational resources to try to understand what you're doing." "Is that significant?" "Potentially. If we could get enough pilots generating these unpredictable patterns simultaneously." She left the implication hanging. Progress was slow and uneven. Some pilots, like Sharma, took to the concept quickly, showing glimmers of the same intuitive flying that Kai demonstrated. Others, particularly those with the most formal training, struggled to unlearn years of doctrinal procedures. Meanwhile, the war continued to deteriorate. Synod forces pushed deeper into human space, and UTF losses mounted. Admiral Volkov's rigid adherence to established doctrine was proving disastrous against an enemy that could predict every standardized maneuver. Then came the news that changed everything. The Synod had launched a major offensive targeting the Proxima Centauri transit hub, the critical junction connecting Earth to its outer colonies. If it fell, the UTF would be fractured, unable to coordinate its already stretched defenses. "All squadrons are being deployed," Thorne announced grimly in the ready room. "This is it, people. The last stand." Kai exchanged glances with the others who had been part of their secret training sessions. They'd made progress, but was it enough? Would it even matter in the chaos of full-scale battle? As they prepared to board their fighters, Commander Rostova appeared in the hangar bay. Her expression was grave as she pulled Thorne aside for a private conversation. When Thorne returned, his face had hardened into a mask of determination. "Change of plans," he announced. "Pioneer Squadron has been assigned a specific sector to defend, the approach to Transit Gate 3. Murmurs rippled through the group. Transit Gate 3 was one of the most critical junctures in the hub. Commander Rostova has expanded our operational parameters. Thorne continued carefully. We are authorized to employ tactical innovations at our discretion. The implication was clear to those who had been part of the secret training. This was their chance to put theory into practice, with the fate of humanity potentially hanging in the balance. As they launched from the carrier, Kai felt an unfamiliar sensation, not the usual pre-battle tension, but a strange certainty. Whatever happened next would change the course of the war, one way or another. The Proxima Centauri transit hub was already a battlefield when they arrived. UTF forces engaged Synod attackers across multiple sectors, the void lit by weapons fire and expanding debris fields. Pioneer Squadron formed up near Transit Gate 3, awaiting the inevitable Synod assault. It didn't take long. Sensors detected a large Synod formation approaching, at least 30 fighters, moving with their characteristic hive mind coordination. "Remember your training," Thorne said calmly over the comm. "Don't think. Feel." Kai closed his eyes briefly, centering himself as he'd learned to do. When he opened them, the flow state embraced him instantly, more powerful than ever before. His awareness expanded beyond his cockpit, beyond his fighter, until he felt connected to the very fabric of space-time around him. "Now," Thorne ordered. Pioneer Squadron broke formation, not in chaos, but in a kind of orchestrated unpredictability. Each pilot followed their instincts, creating patterns that flowed and shifted without mathematical logic. Where they had once moved as a coordinated unit, now they moved as individuals united only by a shared philosophy: be unpredictable. The effect on the approaching Synod formation was immediate and dramatic. Their perfect coordination faltered as their predictive algorithms struggled to calculate responses to the UTF fighters' seemingly random movements. Instead of a single cohesive attack, the Synod force fragmented, individual units pursuing different tactical solutions. "It's working." Sharma's voice was exultant over the comm. Kai barely heard her. He was deep in the flow now, his fighter moving through space as if it were an extension of his consciousness. He felt rather than saw the Synod fighters adjusting their algorithms, attempting to identify patterns in what he was doing. But there were no patterns, only pure, human intuition. His fighter danced through the enemy formation, weapons finding targets in the moments of confusion when Synod predictive algorithms failed. One enemy down, then another. Around him, the other Pioneer pilots were having similar success, creating pockets of chaos that disrupted the Synod's networked intelligence. "Kai." Petrova's voice cut through his concentration. "Something's happening with the Synod command ship." He shifted his attention to the massive vessel at the center of the enemy formation. Sensors showed unusual energy fluctuations, signs of communication traffic increasing exponentially. "They're adapting," he realized aloud, "diverting more resources to counter us." "Good," Thorne replied grimly. "That means less computational power for the rest of their forces." It was true. Across other sectors of the battle, UTF squadrons were reporting unexpected successes as Synod coordination deteriorated. The machine intelligence was prioritizing the anomaly that Pioneer Squadron represented, at the cost of overall battlefield effectiveness. "We need to press the advantage," Kai said. "Hit their command ship directly." "That's suicide," Diaz protested. "Their point defenses are calibrated for standard attack vectors," Kai finished. "But we're not using standard vectors." Thorne hesitated only briefly. "Pioneer Squadron, form up on Tanaka. We're going after the command ship." 6 fighters converged, not in the tight formation that doctrine dictated, but in a loose, fluid arrangement that preserved each pilot's unpredictability while allowing mutual support. Together, they plunged toward the heart of the Synod force. Enemy fighters moved to intercept, but their once perfect coordination was fractured. The Synod's networked intelligence, faced with attacks it couldn't predict, was allocating more and more computational resources to analysis and less to actual combat operations. Petrova's voice came over the comm, pitched with excitement. "Their defensive grid is fluctuating. I'm detecting gaps in coverage. All fighters, weapons free," Thorne ordered. "Hit them with everything we've got." Pioneer Squadron unleashed a barrage against the Synod command ship. Where standard doctrine called for concentrated fire on specific weak points, they attacked seemingly at random, their unpredictable patterns preventing the enemy from anticipating and reinforcing vulnerable areas. The Synod vessel's shields buckled under the assault. Secondary explosions bloomed along its hull as internal systems failed. "One more pass," Thorn called. They came around for a final attack run, fighters weaving through increasingly desperate defensive fire. Kai felt the flow state deepening, his awareness extending to encompass his entire squadron. It was as if they were linked, not by technology like the Synod, but by some deeper human connection, shared intuition guiding their movements. Their combined attack struck the Synod command ship's power core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the massive vessel erupted in a silent, expanding sphere of energy and debris. The effect on the remaining Synod forces was immediate. Without their central coordination hub, the networked intelligence fragmented. Individual units continued fighting, but their perfect synchronization collapsed. "All UTF forces," Admiral Volkov's voice echoed across all channels. "Press the attack. The enemy is in disarray." As the battle raged on, Kai found himself flying alongside Commander Rostova, who had joined the fight in her own fighter. "How did you know?" he asked over a private channel. "Know what, Lieutenant?" she replied, though her tone suggested she understood the question. "That Admiral Volkov would change his mind. That he'd deploy us specifically to target the Synod command ship." Rostova's fighter executed a perfect evasive maneuver, as she replied. "I didn't. Sometimes, Lieutenant Tanaka, you have to trust your instincts and create your own opportunities. You defied orders. It wasn't a question. I interpreted them creatively." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Besides, it's harder to court-martial a commander after she helps win a decisive victory." When the battle finally ended, the UTF had achieved its first major victory of the war. The Proxima Centauri transit hub remained under human control, and the Synod forces had been driven back with unprecedented losses. Back aboard the indomitable Pioneer Squadron found themselves the center of attention. What had begun as an unsanctioned experiment had transformed into a potential turning point in humanity's fight for survival. Admiral Volkov's hologram manifested in the debriefing room, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Commander Rostova, Lieutenant Commander Thorn, the Joint Chiefs have reviewed the battle data from Proxima Centauri." Kai tensed, expecting reprimands or worse. Instead, Volkov continued, "Your unconventional tactics achieved what standard doctrine could not. The Synod's advantage has always been their ability to predict our movements. You found a way to negate that advantage." "Thank you, Admiral," Rostova replied carefully. "Don't thank me yet, Commander. I'm authorizing the immediate formation of a special tactical development unit under your command. Your mission, to fully explore and develop this flow state concept and train select pilots in its application." The announcement sent ripples of shock through the room. Volkov, the staunchest defender of established doctrine, was endorsing their experimental approach. "Lieutenant Tanaka," the Admiral continued, turning his gaze to Kai, "you will serve as primary instructor. Lieutenant Petrova, you will lead the technical research team to understand the phenomenon and develop training methodologies." "Yes, sir," they responded in unison. Volkov's expression darkened. "Make no mistake, this isn't a complete validation of your actions. Regulations were broken. Chain of command was circumvented. Under normal circumstances, there would be severe consequences." He paused, his hologram flickering slightly. "But these are not normal circumstances. Humanity is fighting for its survival. Sometimes that requires us to adapt." With that, his hologram disappeared. In the silence that followed, Thorn was the first to speak. "Well, I'll be damned." The old man actually admitted he was wrong. "Not wrong," Rostova corrected. "Just not completely right." 6 months later, Kai stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned UTF carrier Paradigm Shift, watching as the first full squadron of X-Flow fighters prepared for launch. The experimental craft had been designed specifically to enhance and amplify the flow state phenomenon, with neural interfaces that connected directly to the pilot's consciousness and adaptive energy fields that could resonate with the quantum fluctuations Petrova had identified. Nervous? Petrova asked, joining him at the viewport. Kai shook his head. Excited. They're ready. Not just them. She handed him a data tablet. The analysis from our last engagement shows Synod forces are already attempting to adapt to flow state tactics. Their algorithms are becoming more flexible, less dependent on pure prediction. They're learning. Yes, but so are we. Petrova's eyes gleamed with the thrill of scientific discovery. Every adaptation they make reveals more about how their networked intelligence functions. And the more we understand them, the better we can fight them, Kai finished. Commander Rostova, now Captain Rostova, approached, her uniform bearing the insignia of her new rank. X-Flow Squadron is cleared for launch. Instructor Tanaka. Care to join them? Kai smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Captain. As he headed toward the hangar bay, Kai reflected on the journey that had brought him here. What had begun as his personal liability, his inability to follow standard procedures, had become humanity's greatest asset in the war against the Synod. The laws of space combat had indeed been rewritten, not by technology or tactics, but by embracing the most human of qualities: unpredictability, intuition, and the refusal to be confined by rigid patterns. Minutes later, his X-Flow fighter launched from the carrier, joining the formation that was already dissolving into a fluid, unpredictable arrangement as each pilot found their own flow state. All pilots, Kai transmitted, mission parameters are as follows. Engage Synod forces in Sector 7, disrupt their communication network, and evaluate their adaptive responses. But most importantly, he paused, feeling the familiar sensation as his consciousness expanded into the flow state. Trust your instincts. The squadron accelerated toward their objective, each fighter moving in its own dance, yet somehow still part of a greater whole. The Synod would continue to adapt, to evolve their strategies against this new threat. But for the first time since the war began, humanity was dictating the terms of engagement. As Kai's fighter darted ahead of the others, he surrendered completely to the flow, becoming one with his craft and the space around it. The future remained uncertain, the war far from over. But in this moment, gliding through the darkness between stars, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The Synod might have perfect algorithms, networked intelligence, and computational powers beyond human comprehension. But humans had something no machine could ever truly replicate: the beautiful chaos of intuition, the unpredictable spark of creativity, and the stubborn refusal to surrender even when logic said all was lost. One human pilot had rewritten the laws of space combat. Now a new generation would take that revolution forward. As the X-Flow Squadron approached the engagement zone, long-range sensors began to detect Synod activity. The enemy had adapted there. Formations since the last battle, less rigid, more flexible. They were learning. All pilots, Kai transmitted, remember that flow isn't about following a new set of rules. It's about transcending rules altogether. Stay unpredictable, even to yourself. The Synod forces detected them and began to deploy. Their formation was different. Instead of their traditional grid pattern, they spread out in a more diffuse cloud, making it harder to disrupt their network with targeted strikes. They're evolving, Petrova observed from the command carrier, distributing their computational nodes instead of centralizing them. Then we evolved too, Kai replied. He closed his eyes briefly, deepening his connection to the flow state. When he opened them, the battle space appeared transformed. Not just sensor data and tactical displays, but patterns of energy and possibility that rippled through the void. Engage at will, but remain adaptive, he ordered. Don't fall into patterns, even successful ones. The X-Flow fighters accelerated toward the enemy, each following their own intuition, their own dance through the battlefield. Kai's fighters sliced through the enemy formation, movements guided by something deeper than thought. Each adjustment, each vector change flowed naturally from the last, creating a sequence that no algorithm could predict because it wasn't predetermined even in his own mind. A Synod fighter appeared in his path, weapons charging. Kai didn't evade. He accelerated directly toward it, then executed a maneuver that momentarily pushed his inertial dampeners beyond their limits. The G-forces crushed him into his seat as his fighter corkscrewed around the enemy vessel, placing him perfectly for a killing shot. Their coordination is fragmenting, reported Lieutenant Sharma, her voice tight with concentration. They're allocating more resources to tracking individual pilots instead of maintaining battlefield awareness. It was working. The Synod's greatest strength had always been its unified intelligence, the ability to coordinate dozens of vessels as a single entity. But forced to track multiple unpredictable targets, that advantage was being neutralized. Targeting their communication nodes, Thorne announced. His fighter plunged deeper into the enemy formation, weapons finding vulnerabilities that appeared and disappeared in milliseconds. Kai watched as the battle unfolded around him, a chaotic dance of human intuition against machine precision. The X-Flow fighters moved like quicksilver, each pilot deep in their own flow state, yet somehow part of a greater whole. They weren't coordinated in the traditional sense. There was no formation, no predefined attack pattern. But they were connected, human consciousness operating on a level that transcended mere calculation. The Synod forces fought back with increasing desperation, their algorithms recalibrating in real time to counter the unpredictable assault. 2 X-Flow fighters disappeared from the tactical display, casualties of the enemy's adaptation. They're learning faster than expected, Petrova warned. Energy signatures suggest they're devoting over 60% of computational resources to predictive modeling. Good, Kai replied. That means less processing power for everything else. He pushed deeper into the flow state, awareness expanding until he could almost sense the currents of data flowing through the Synod network. There was a pattern there, not in individual movements, but in how the entire system responded to unpredictability. The more they focused on predicting the unpredictable, the more vulnerable they became to all fighters, he transmitted, converge on these coordinates, but approach from different vectors, maintain unpredictability. The squadron acknowledged, each pilot choosing their own path toward the designated location, a nondescript point in space that seemed to hold no tactical significance. But Kai had sensed something there, a nexus in the Synod's distributed network where data streams converged. As the X-Flow fighters closed in from multiple directions, the Synod response became increasingly fragmented. Their vessels moved to intercept, but without the perfect coordination that had once made them nearly invincible. Now, Kai ordered. 12 quantum torpedoes launched simultaneously, each following a different approach vector, each programmed with random fluctuations in their guidance systems. The Synod defenses tracked some, missed others. 3 torpedoes penetrated to their target, a previously undetected command relay that had been coordinating the distributed Synod network. The explosion was spectacular, a sphere of energy that rippled outward in multidimensional patterns. Across the battlefield, Synod vessels faltered, their movements suddenly jerky and uncoordinated as their network struggled to reconfigure without the key relay node. All fighters pressed the advantage, Captain Rostova ordered from the command carrier. Hit them while they're fragmented. The X-Flow squadron didn't need to be told twice. They descended upon the disorganized enemy force like wolves among sheep, their unpredictable movements making them nearly impossible to target effectively. Synod vessels, deprived of their perfect coordination, fell one after another. In less than 10 minutes, it was over. The enemy force had been decimated, the survivors jumping to faster than light to escape. As the X-Flow fighters regrouped for the return to their carrier, Kai remained in his flow state, reflecting on what had just occurred. The Synod had adapted, yes, but so had humanity. This wasn't just a new tactic or technology. It was a fundamental shift in how war was waged in the depths of space. All pilots, return to base, Rostova commanded. Excellent work today. You know they'll adapt again, Petrova said privately to Kai over a secure channel. Next time will be harder. Of course they will, Kai replied, watching as a squadron formed up for the return journey. But so will we. That's the difference between us and them. They adapt through calculation. We adapt through intuition. And intuition has no limits. As the paradigm shift appeared on his view screen, its massive hangar bay opened to receive the returning fighters, Kai felt a profound sense of possibility. The war was far from over, the challenges ahead immense. But for the first time, humanity was fighting on its own terms, embracing the very qualities that made it human. The beautiful unpredictability of consciousness, the wild creativity of intuition, the stubborn defiance of beings who refused to be reduced to mere patterns. One human pilot had rewritten the laws of space combat. And in doing so, perhaps he had shown humanity a path not just to survival, but to victory. Dr. Lena Petrova stood in the observation lounge, watching as the X-Flow fighters returned to the carrier. Her scientific mind still struggled with the implications of what they had discovered. The flow state defied conventional physics, creating quantum-level anomalies that shouldn't be possible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Thinking about publishing a paper, Commander Rostova asked, joining her at the viewport. Petrova smiled slightly. What would I even call it? The effect of human intuition on quantum field manipulation and its application in combat maneuvering? Catchy, Rostova replied dryly. But I think we'll keep this classified for now. They watched in silence as Kai's fighter was the last to dock, settling into its berth with fluid precision. You know, Petrova said thoughtfully, the implications go beyond military applications. If human consciousness can influence quantum fields to create localized unpredictability, it raises profound questions about the nature of reality itself. One word at a time, Dr. Rostova cautioned. Let's focus on surviving this one before we start contemplating the universe. But as Kai emerged from his fighter, exhaustion evident in his movements, but satisfaction clear on his face, Petrova couldn't help but wonder. They had stumbled upon something fundamental, not just a tactical advantage, but perhaps a glimpse into the true relationship between mind and matter, consciousness and reality. The Synod, for all their computational power, lacked the one thing that might be the key to understanding the universe itself: the beautiful, unpredictable, intuitive spark of human consciousness. In that moment, watching as pilots embraced and celebrated their victory, Petrova realized that this wasn't just about winning a war. It was about affirming what it meant to be human in a universe that often seemed cold, mechanistic, and indifferent. Perhaps that was the true significance of what Kai had discovered. Not just a way to fight machines, but a reminder of what made humanity worth fighting for. The battle was won. The war continued. But something had changed fundamentally in the relationship between humanity and its most formidable enemy. The Synod still held overwhelming numerical and technological advantages, but humans now possessed something the machines couldn't calculate or predict: the limitless potential of intuition unleashed. As the celebration wound down and the pilots dispersed to rest and recover, Kai found himself standing alone on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. Each point of light represented possibilities, worlds to protect, discoveries to make, futures to forge. They're beautiful, aren't they? Admiral Volkov's voice surprised him. The fleet commander had arrived unannounced, his weathered face illuminated by the starlight. Yes, sir, Kai replied simply. I was wrong about you, Lieutenant, Volkov admitted, joining him at the viewport. About your methods. About what was possible. The admission clearly didn't come easily to the traditionalist commander. We were all finding our way, sir. Volkov nodded. Slowly. The Joint Chiefs have approved full implementation of the X-Flow program throughout the fleet. Every carrier will have at least one squadron trained in your methods. That's good news, sir. It's a start. Volkov turned to face him directly. But the Synod will adapt again. They always do. We need to stay ahead of them. Pioneer new applications of this flow state. Push the boundaries of what's possible. Kai met the Admiral's gaze. Is that an order, sir? For the first time in their acquaintance, Volkov smiled. A small, tight expression, but genuine nonetheless. No, Lieutenant. It's an invitation. To continue doing what you do best, breaking the rules and rewriting them. As the Admiral departed, Kyra turned his gaze to the stars. The future remained uncertain, the path forward unclear. But for the first time since the war began, he felt something more powerful than hope. Purpose. One human pilot had rewritten the laws of space combat. Now it was time to see just how far those new laws could take humanity, not just toward victory, but toward a deeper understanding of their own potential. Out among the stars, the Synod were undoubtedly recalculating, adapting, evolving. Let them try. Humanity had rediscovered its greatest weapon, the beautiful unpredictability of the human spirit. And no algorithm, no matter how advanced, could ever fully predict where that spirit might lead.